Good afternoon. My name is Ala McCoy. I'm Director of Venture Development at University of Maryland UM Ventures. And I'd like to extend a very warm welcome on this very cold day to all of you who joined us today for the next installment on Startup Fundamentals Workshop Series, both our live webinar audience and those watching a recorded version on our Startup Unity YouTube channel. This workshop series is offered in partnership with MTech, Maryland Technology Enterprise Institute at the Clark School of Engineering. To everyone in the live session, please feel free to submit questions using the Q&A function. You should be able to find it at the bottom of your screen. And feel free to submit those questions as soon as they pop in your head. We are recording this session and will be posted on our Startup PMD YouTube channel. So you may submit your questions anonymously if you would like. Very happy to welcome today's speakers, Dr. Blair Brennan Slaughter, founder and CEO of Delve Consulting. She's an expert in scaling startups and managing organizational transitions. Megan Huey is People's Operations Mentor with 16 plus years advising early stage companies in healthcare and field. And Chandler Skinner, a team member at Delve Consulting. So today's topic is applicable to early stage startups across all industries. You've launched your company, you are getting some traction, and now you need help. You need to hire your first employees. Great problem to have. I'm not sure if it is a problem, but great place to be at. So how do you hire those first employees? So Blair and Megan will shed some light on this exciting process. So it's the mic is yours.
Great, thanks, Ala, and welcome everyone, and thanks for being here today. I'm Blair Slaughter. I'm the founder and CEO of Delve Consulting, and our practice really is in helping startups scale. That's what we work on from what we call the human capital or the HR side of the business. And our goal is we work with really early stage companies, 2 or 3 people up to people who have had successful exits. And the goal is to meet you wherever you are in your journey as a founder and startup entrepreneur, and help you get the tools you need right when you need them. We do have a presentation to share today, but we found that these sessions are most effective if you, like Ala was saying, if you want to give us your challenges or problems that you're dealing with as we go through this, we're very happy to engage in problem solving with you and giving you practical tips that you can readily apply. All 3 of us are entrepreneurs ourselves, having started multiple businesses. So we understand how much of a challenge it can be to be doing this work of finding just the right talent. So hopefully what you'll get out of today's session is that we're helping you avoid some of the mistakes that we personally made on our own journey. Then I'm going to turn it over to Megan, who'll be running the webinar for us today.
All right, thanks, Blair. So I think we wanted to just kind of get started maybe with a brief, show of hands or poll to see, how many employees any of you have, just to kind of orient us. So you can, if you haven't used this before, you can either click on that link or use the QR code and weigh in. And then if we have a few responses, we'll see kind of where everybody is on their hiring journey so far. Okay, so far nobody. Oh, good. And I also appreciate these questions. So I will try to capture those and try to answer some of those as we go here. And then if not, we can try to answer some of them offline or afterwards as well, if that's helpful. Okay, excellent. Well, in the kind of thinking through your number of employees, we can go, there you go. Wanted to kind of think through, all right, so where everyone is. Seems like there's some folks that have no employees yet, which is, I think, daunting in different ways. And then having hired a few folks, it sounds like you guys have gone through the hiring process at least once or twice. And so there's some things that we've discovered that make things a lot easier. And there's some gotchas or some common mishaps. So when we think through like why it seems obvious, but when you need to hire somebody, what is the rationale behind why it matters to do it this way? Oh, you can go to the next one if you don't mind. And so really it sounds obvious, but I think people often forget that the future of your company, not just the people themselves, but the future of your company often depends on how well you hire. And it's something that's very rarely measured in terms of the level of success per hire. And a bad hire is extremely expensive. So even for an entry-level role, you might, if you hire the wrong person, you have to let them go. You end up, wasting $15,000, $20,000, even for a more entry-level role. So a big thing that we have seen, though, is also bad hires typically, or at least almost half the time, are based on not having a good process in place. And there's some sort of anecdotal, research that has been done on successful founders and CEOs who say that they spend sometimes 40, 50% of their time initially on, recruiting and hiring. And so with that in mind, if it's something that you're going to be doing 40 or 50% of the time in your first few years, then it's probably something you want to get down really well and have a really structured process, like you would with your product or service that you're already trying to market. So some of the mistakes that we have seen, and we'll kind of go through maybe how to remediate some of those later, but some of the common mistakes that we've seen, and this is the biggest one, is hiring too quickly. And by that, I don't mean too soon in your company's journey, although that's somewhat part of it. I think it's too quickly in that you haven't orchestrated or structured the process and know what you're looking for. And so definitely getting clear expectations helps with that, but also having an unstructured hiring process or evaluation criteria, and we'll go into that quite a bit more later, that's a big reason why people end up with the wrong hire or at the wrong time. And this is typically what people do is they'll go find a job description online somewhere, and then they will rely on that to basically edit that instead of creating one based on the needs of their company. And if you go to recruit someone, if you rely on the job title that someone else came up with, you often end up with, unclear role and expectations for what it means at your company. This one, after you've had a few hires and you start getting people who are starting to be managers, sometimes, not always, but sometimes it becomes a cultural norm to view yourself as a success if you have a bigger team. So empire building is something that I think happens a little bit later on, but can happen pretty early, especially in teams where you have one technical co-founder and then you're not as familiar with one of the other areas. Someone new might really try to bring on a lot of people and without as much of the justification that you would need. So kind of hiring just because someone asks is sort of, in desperation. A lot of us will reach out and ask for that, but sometimes it's helpful to have a better assessment of what the actual needs are before you start just, hiring or placing a job out there. And feel free in the chat too, if there are, hiring mistakes that you've seen done either in you or that you've made yourself, feel free to put those in there. I think we can all learn from each other. And I think founders are often very eager to bring people into the process, which is great, but they're often very willing and exhausted from hiring, and they try to remove themselves too quickly. And it's hard to know when to do that. And then also, if you're doing equity in your company, sometimes people don't quite understand what that looks like over time, haven't pulled in the right kind of resources or advisors early enough, and so they don't have enough equity later on, or the reverse could happen. You don't give people enough in the early days, and then they're not willing to stay. So just kind of having a compensation strategy is something that's very easy to miss. And so just, there's a lot of input you can get from people for free, resources like this, but also subject matter experts that you can just call up. And if you don't have a network, you can start to cultivate that. You can recruit that network too. And those can be really helpful as you start to, assess these candidates and as get advice on what kinds of roles you might need. So if you have made a hire, what was your first role? Or if you have not, what is your first hire that you think that you'll need or that you anticipate needing? And I recognize that there's probably a wide variety of companies in the group. So this is kind of interesting too, just to see what types of roles people anticipate. I had a feeling engineering would be in there. Okay. All right, excellent. So when we think about, oh, there's another error. When we think about the first type of role, the first few roles that you hire, there are no hard and fast rules. And obviously, if it's your company, you can do what you want. But when you think about that, it's helpful, I think, sometimes to think, what are you solving for? And having a really clear need of, is this immediate need that I'm solving for or a long-term need? And an immediate need would be, we're not moving fast enough on product. We need to hire somebody who can come in and, let's say, build something new or get features out the door faster. Longer term would look like having a plan for what the future of the product looks like and how this role would fit into that. And it doesn't have to, that part doesn't have to be exhaustive. I think it's more of a check for yourself just to know, am I just hiring because it feels like something's on fire and I need somebody else in the room? Or is this already a part of your longer range planning? A lot of the initial roles, both I've seen lots of companies do, they will hire, people who are very specialized in one thing, but don't really have a lot of value that they can provide outside that one thing. And utility players don't have to be generalists in terms of like business generalists. They can be engineering generalists. You can have people even in sales and marketing who can play a wide variety of roles in sales or marketing or customer success. So kind of thinking through those initial utility players and recognizing that those players may not, they may grow with your company, but they also may not be the people who ultimately can get you to your end goal, depending on how large and the company becomes or complex. So as you start to get more successful, you start to see that it's helpful to hire more specialized roles. So in general, I usually tell people, the first few hires should be someone who's helping you sell, increase revenue, or someone who's helping you build. And that would be your engineers, or that would be someone who, if you do life sciences, so drug development, those would be some of your initial people, your clinical development folks, and maybe ClinOps types folks. But you have a lot of resources that you could have, you can go quite a ways with just some fractional or free resources for a lot of those supportive functions. So you can get a fractional finance, we do things like this too. Fractional HR, fractional IT services. You don't need to hire a full-time person to help set up people's laptops, things like that. And usually people understand that concept with legal. They don't hire an attorney, right away. So it's sort of the same idea with any of those G&A or back office type functions. So when you go, assuming you're going to go hire, you understand the need, you want to go write a job description rather than copy and paste it from somewhere else or use, some other resource. What we found is most helpful to be really outcome oriented. And so I use this example here of a couple of job descriptions I actually found that were on LinkedIn. And so a lot of them were just write good code, fix bugs, very generic. And you have no real idea of like what it means to collaborate, what the outcomes we're looking for. But as you get a little more specific, that's somewhat helpful. But it doesn't actually tell you what good looks like in any of those things and how this person's performance would be measured. So when you kind of go to the outcome oriented, it's very specific. You'll see in this example, it's being clear about the types of services that they should be able to use. It should be very clear about the volume of information or requests that they would be having, and also just the expectations for, performance. So in this case, uptime of almost 100%. And I think those things take time to develop. So often I see why people skip them, and you don't have to have them be exhaustive of every single thing that the person must be able to do, but enough that it's the core group of things that someone would need to be able to do and that you need them to deliver in order for this to be a successful hire. So these tie directly to that problem statement that you have identified when you first decided you wanted to hire someone. So the biggest thing is, and often people overlook this, they stick a job out on LinkedIn and just wait for someone to fall into the job application. And that's okay to do. And there's no reason why you shouldn't put it out there. Sometimes it can be overwhelming. I can say a few roles that I've hired for in the past, I've gotten 900 applicants in 2 days. So then it's just overwhelming versus going out and actually sourcing the people that exactly what you're looking for. And I think there's a few different ways, and obviously if you don't know what you're looking for, you won't find it. So that's where getting a really clear idea of what problems this person would solve. And can I give you an example of how to ask for this? Because what I find is I get this, I would say at least once a week, I get an email from somebody saying, hey, look at this job description, who do you know? And if you see dozens of those, it starts to be just kind of it all blends in together. Whereas if you kind of look at the right, and I say the right way, a more effective way to do this, you can go to the next one there. You know, you can get very specific with someone, and it helps the person on the other end of it know how to help you. So when people forward that and say, can you share this job description? It's not as helpful to me because I don't even know if you don't even know if they're going to click on the job description. But if someone reaches out and they say to me, like, when you're thinking about the best people that you worked with at X company or Y company, and the people who delivered X, Y, or Z, who are those folks? You get much quicker turnaround on the referrals or candidates. And then those introductions, whether or not they're interested, you still are getting connected with the kinds of people who would know the right type of candidates. And while it feels like a little overbearing, it sometimes works pretty well. As if you'll just sit down with somebody and say, hey, do you have 10 minutes? Can we look at your LinkedIn contacts together? I need to hire somebody. And you can, because your memory and your recall is a little tough. I think if it's been 10, 15 years, you don't remember the people that you worked with at every company. And so if you're able to get more specific, you usually can get better results. So, excuse me, the hiring process, typically, you know, if it's not structured, it's, you know, you kind of see an applicant, you call them, you have a couple people get on the phone with them or on a Zoom or meet them in person, and then you say, like, yeah, I think they fit our culture. Or, yeah, they've done enough of this, they've had the right title at a previous job. However, you're not really crafting a really effective interview plan. And kind of like we said, you know, about half of the bad hires are based on lack of process. And you can over process this too. So I will say, don't do that. There's sort of a happy medium. But in this case, I just kind of quickly drafted out the way that I would say kind of at least a starting point template for kicking off search, getting the job description going, all of that. And in many cases, you might be the hiring manager for the several other hires. It may not just be, you know, that you hand that off to someone else, but then having somebody who's in a people operations or HR type role, and it could be your admin, you know, support if you have that, or it could be other people. It doesn't have to be someone who is, you know, the HR person at your company, because you probably don't have one. But really focusing on what are you trying to accomplish at each step. And if you have an idea of what you're trying to ask questions about, then you can tailor your questions specifically to that. And the one thing I'll highlight here is the skills assessment piece of this in particular is the one that I think gives people the most pause, because it feels awkward, and also it's hard to kind of identify how do I assess these skills. If you can't assess their skills in an interview, it's going to be really hard to assess their skills when they start working for you. So you need to at least have a really clear idea of, and it doesn't have to be perfect, but I'll give an example of, you know, I was hiring for a, you know, kind of more junior generalist type person, somebody who didn't have a ton of experience, so they don't have a whole lot that they can pull from. But what a lot of you're hiring for is, you know, aptitude for, you know, learning quickly, willingness to kind of jump in and do whatever it takes, and also, you know, detail orientation. That's not what the scorecard said. It was more specific, but you know, I went through and I had 4 finalist candidates, and I had all of them do the skills assessment, which in this case was a very basic, you know, list of things. And I just asked them to prioritize it and tell me why. Again, it took, you know, probably 20 minutes to put together. And then I went and reviewed them, but I blinded them. So I wanted to make sure I was not being biased, because I really connected with one of them. And I thought I thought she had a lot of potential. When I went back and looked at the skills assessment, she was actually the 3rd lowest. So of the 4, she really didn't shine. And I was surprised, and I maintain this to this day. The first person that was ultimately the best candidate, she was a terrible interviewer, or she did terrible in interviews rather. And so, you know, but I hired her, and she has done, I will say I've worked for 8, 9 years now. She is a phenomenal people ops person, and has really progressed and done a lot with successful companies. So it just goes to show you just have to be really thoughtful about that process, and don't, you know, kind of quote unquote fall in love with any of the candidates just because they are good at selling themselves. Excellent. So yeah, and I was going to ask Chandler, since you've been doing a lot of this more recently, is there anything on the kickoff that you think would be helpful for folks to know?
Yeah, I think making sure that everyone who's going to be involved in the process is in that call is really helpful. We did a recruiting process for a client not too long ago, and there was this issue of um, misalignment on what exactly the deal breakers were for a particular role. And so they would make it part of the way through the process, and a candidate would get dropped because that particular interviewer saw it as a deal breaker. But in reality, the final decision maker didn't think that was that big of a deal. And I mean, that led that process to have to go through 3 different iterations. It took many months to find this particular candidate. And so had there been a kickoff where all of those questions had been asked, all of those expectations had been aligned, I think that would have saved them both a lot of time and money in the way that they recruited for that position.
Yeah, that's a great example. And yes, that was a painful one. So we're happy that they finally figured that out, and we were happy to help them, but it is frustrating and can definitely cause a lot of consternation and confusion if you don't have that. So I appreciate that. Thank you, Chandler.
Yeah.
One question that we also get is, what do we do if we are a solopreneur at this point when we want to get other people's input? Because there may not be people to be the panel for. So Megan, I'm kind of curious, when people ask you that question, what do you think are some of the other resources that people can rely on to help them make good choices in their hiring?
I think this is where if you reach out to, people who maybe you don't even know them, but and start to build that relationship of, all right, I don't know anything about marketing. I'm going to reach out to this marketing person, and I'll ask for introductions to marketing people. And, people like Ala could kind of say, here's a group of marketing people. Why don't you call them? I have many times used just advisors, people that are just kind of mentors as interviewers, because they know more about the role than I do. I think your board is often a good source of those things. If you have a board, if you don't have a board yet, you can usually go and ask the types of people that you would ultimately like to hire. One way to think about that would be, if you picture your company in 5 or 6, 7 years, what type of person would be leading marketing if you were where you expect to be in 5 or 6 years? And go find that person and then ask them. A lot of it has to do with just asking questions of people and being willing to pick up the phone. And then I think you can also just look for interview guides from people. We do this for some clients, people who have done a lot of interviewing and are able to at least give you an overview of what we think of the candidate based on what we know. So I think there's a lot of different options there.
I think the other place that people have questions about is, especially if they haven't experienced a good version of it, is onboarding. And I'd love to have you two, what are your thoughts on, what is onboarding? What's the value of onboarding, and how do we do it, especially in small organizations?
Sure. Yeah. Well, so for the onboarding, I think a lot of it depends on just, again, like the planning part, but making sure that you know exactly, and I say by day, the first day, by the end of the day, what do they need to have done? And then be pretty prescriptive initially. It helps kind of, one, keep you on track, but also sets expectations for them. And then make sure that you are spending enough time really getting feedback on, how they're doing as they get onboarded, but also what the deliverables are and the quality of those deliverables. So for example, if you are, hiring even let's call it a general, like entry-level type role, the person could be responsible by the end of the first week to have set up meetings with, these 3 people and have sent a list of, 45 vendors. Like, it does not have to be complicated, but giving them something that you can say, all right, they did or didn't deliver this thing. And then you build on that and you make it gradually more complex. And then I think over the course of, the first week, I usually do day, first week, first month, and then first quarter. So I kind of have goals, and sometimes those will sort of change as you go. If someone's really, doing incredibly well, we might make those more aggressive goals. But largely it's setting those out and communicating them clearly in writing, like showing them this is what I'm thinking, and getting their feedback early on is really helpful. So when we think about kind of evaluating the candidates, we talked a little bit about the, ways in which we can interview and ask questions, but the questions could be related to nothing, not related to the kind of skills or core areas of the role. And the other thing I see is when we put things like communication skills or, prioritization in a job description, and we're expecting people to assess that, what I think is good communication and what you think is good communication could be very different. You know, to me, it means, I don't know, texting back within 10 minutes. To you, it could be this person knows how to write a speech. Like those are completely different things. And if without that kickoff, you wouldn't have that. So getting clear on what these look like. So, and I'm, again, looking at lots of things, people will say yes or no, this person is or is not good at it, which is a little vague, to say the least. But you can get more clear, but again, it doesn't still describe what you're looking for, what a good response would be. And so a better way to do it is to, write out, when I think of good communication skills, what are the things that I mean? And I mean that their response is well organized, like they would use sort of a framework or something that it organizes their situation and then the actions that they took. And then also that they would provide relevant examples and that they, were able to listen. Like that's my definition, but yours might be different. So being clear on that. And when you kick off, you go through these items and say, to the interviewers, or if it's just you make sure you're aware of them. And you go through and make sure that each one of the things that you're going to be assessing has a question associated with it, at least one or two, so that you're, at the end of it, you're actually able to kind of reflect back and provide sort of a more holistic assessment. Is there anything you guys would add on that one? So when we think about, all right, we've interviewed, we've done a great job of getting all of our things structured, and then we decided to hire somebody. One of the biggest things that I have found is people are sometimes more willing to just send an offer cold in an email rather than calling the person. And I know it sounds, again, sort of overly, enthusiastic, but I do think that matters a lot. It sets the tone for the relationship with the person that you would be hiring. And this is assuming also that they're someone you've never known before. But even more so if it's a referral from your network, the way that you treat this person on the way in is the way that they're going to talk about your company moving forward. So usually it's good to get a verbal offer out the door and talk to them and then kind of gauge how they're, if they seem like completely unexcited, it might be worth further conversation before you just forward a written offer letter. Putting an offer letter together is great. What I have found on so many occasions is it usually includes the start date, the title, and maybe the base salary, and surprisingly, not always even that. And that's it. And then they've got this letter, and then when something happens in the future, they have none of the things, the clarity that you're looking for when you're if you have a performance issue or if the person wants a promotion, any of those things, you need to have this. And you don't have to make it complicated. It can be a template that you update per person. That's what I do. And then, having some of those things like the at-will employment statement in there, if you have a confidentiality agreement, if you don't, you might want to find one, or any of the contingencies, the benefits eligibility could be contingent on a certain amount of time going by. Any of those things are helpful to have. And I include when I say the compensation details, I mean, the way that you phrase that is important, and making clear that, some of it is variable if you do offer a bonus or some kind, and equity, making sure that the employee, the person knows what the equity actually even means. So, and then I think it's good to follow up with the person, making sure that you don't just put a date on the letter and then wait and see. Almost every time I've seen that happen, the person goes finds another job, or they kind of feel like they're not as excited about the role. Just really basic stuff, and it feels a little bit like sales, but I do think it works. And then, making sure that we talked about the onboarding, making sure that that's really clear, and then just adding those check-ins so that you don't forget. Because if you're like me, I often don't remember those things. So when we go to hiring the first employee, one of the things that, and I will say as a mistake that I have made, was that I miscategorized a few of the first people that I had hired, and it came back to bite me, and I can share why. But would love to know, when you think about some of this, how much you kind of know about it, and some of this, honestly, I don't even remember until I do a refresher. But one question would be, if you have an independent contractor, they're not eligible for any of the benefits or protections offered to employees. And this is one that is a little bit nuanced, but we can talk about it briefly. So going to that, there's two. When you think about that, it is a myth that employees, workers are still entitled to the same protections. And just because someone under one law might be categorized as an independent contractor, another law might, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later, on another area, they might be considered employees. So you have to be really thoughtful about that piece and not just assume that you know whether or not they are an employee versus an independent contractor. Let's see, a couple more here. So a lot of this is really related to, the federal government and how they categorize employees or workers. So curious to know if anybody's ever heard of this 3-part control test, or if any thoughts on that one.
If people don't know, could you provide like a really brief explanation?
Sure. Yeah, so the 3-part control test really just indicates how much control an individual person has over their work. And so they use it based on 3 factors. It's typically how much behavioral control the person has over their work, their financial control, and then the relational, the relational control of the relationship with the employer. And so if there's too many that are heavily weighted towards, this person is clearly relying on you for all of their income, and I won't quote all of them because I think there's some nuance there that might be helpful to go into, but if they are relying on this for all of their income or most of their income, if they don't get to set the times that they work, or you have to train them extensively on a specific way you're trying to do something, they probably are not an independent contractor. And then that relational is, can they set the terms of the contract or the agreement? Is it driven largely by the employer, or is it sort of equal? An independent contractor relationship, it would be more even in terms of the terms.
And what are the implications? Let's see what people vote, but I'd be very interested, Megan, also in the implications of misclassifying somebody, either independent contractor versus employee, and what are the implications of that? And I know that's very nuanced as well, but I'd love to hear your thoughts, but maybe people can vote first.
And we may not have people vote on that one because that one's a bit tricky. There we go. So this is the tricky part, is that if you go to that next one, we can see that really the IRS uses the control test, but because the federal government want to make things complicated, the Department of Labor use a completely different one. And so that is a 7-part test that kind of goes through a variety of factors, in a little bit more detail than what the IRS uses. So some of the issues, and there are many, so I will not say this is a long list of things. Miscategorization, one, you run the risk of somebody, suing you or in the future and saying something related to, well, I was not paid correctly, I was due overtime but didn't get it. And you never think you're going to have a falling out with an employee, but and hopefully you avoid those, but sometimes it happens. And the other one is unemployment. So if you choose to, and there again of others, if you choose to categorize someone and they go file for unemployment, then the Department of Labor, in this case Maryland, would be coming to find out, why did you categorize that person this way? And then they keep tabs on you a little longer, and you do have to pay a fine. And so they do put some stipulations around it, and the fine isn't heavy, but it is inconvenient to go through that process, and you do want to categorize them correctly. And almost every company does it incorrectly, sometimes, myself included. And so it's helpful to kind of make sure you've asked and gotten a gut check on, whether or not they should be an employee or not.
And does it also relate to whether or not they are exempt or not exempt, or and what maybe, because I think that's some people don't understand the difference between those two things. Is that tied into this as well?
Yes, in some ways, that might be, actually, Chandler, you might be more well equipped to answer this one than I am. But yes, in some ways it is. I think it is also related to the unemployment, factor, as well as any sort of benefits and things like that. But okay, Chandler, you want to on that one?
Sure. Yeah. Usually, and my understanding is that you're not generally classifying independent contractors as exempt or unexempt, but you think of people who are exempt, employees, so not independent contractors who are exempt, as people who are salaried, right? Those people who, they're not if they work 41 hours instead of 40 hours in a week, right? They're not getting paid for that extra hour. They get paid to do their work. Most of the time, you're not going to have an issue classifying someone as exempt, but there are technically some specific rules in terms of who you can and can't allow. And there is a minimum salary, and that can depend on the state. My understanding is that Maryland kind of follows the federal rule here, but it's around $30,000 to $40,000 a year. Below that, you actually can't claim someone as exempt, even if they meet some of the rules. So it's worth looking into just to make sure that you're doing that the right way as well. But the exemption, that word refers to exempt from overtime or not exempt from overtime.
Excellent, thank you.
Yep.
That is helpful. So this is one actually that actually came out of a real world situation, is that an individual wanted to be an independent contractor for a myriad of other reasons, and they were more than happy to sign a consulting agreement. And yes, it is not okay, even if they agree with it. It doesn't matter. They still need to be categorized correctly. And it actually ended up being a really contentious situation with the person, because they did not want to be an employee of that company and all of the requirements that went along with that. So if you can, try to get that ironed out first. And I think sometimes it's easy to start with independent contractors when you very first get started, and that's okay depending upon the level of the relationship. But when it's very clear that the relationship is shifting towards consistent, and like those 7-point and 3-point tests, it's best to just hire the person and avoid all of the complexities there, even though it is more onerous on you as an employer to have employees versus contractors. So this is sort of myth and fact. You can do it, and there's nothing wrong with doing it as long as the work that they're doing initially is with an independent contractor. It is as an independent contractor, but once they, if they're working for you a couple hours on a specific project so you can see, that's different than you just hiring them hourly until you have enough money to hire them as an employee, something like that. So making sure that you have a clear idea of how that work fits into these classifications is helpful. I'm happy to answer questions. I know that was a lot of information. Happy to answer questions or address any of these. Blair or Chandler, was there anything that you wanted to make sure and cover?
I just had one question going through all of that. I imagine that a lot of people could be pretty scared based on, and not, rightfully so, but that's a lot to worry about. You hear about these 3-part tests, 7-part tests. I imagine a lot of people are like, I've never even heard of either one of those. And I think many people want to make sure that they're doing the right thing. What are some ways that people can move towards classifying people in the right way, knowing that it's easy to make a mistake?
I mean, fortunately, the tests, what they call them, they're out there. You can go look at them on the IRS website and read for yourself. And it's sort of your best understanding of what the role is based on these 3 factors. And then similarly with the Department of Labor. And they make them pretty clear, and they give examples as well. So you can see examples of who might be an employee. And they, I think that always illustrates kind of the real world situation that you will likely find yourself in. So both of them are there. And there's also several websites out there that you can kind of go in and put some information in, and it will let you know what their best estimate is, whether or not it's an employee or an independent contractor.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like we have... Go ahead, Blair.
I was just going to say, people can also tap into the resources such as that they might find at their university, or their mentors, or if they happen to have investors will often help provide guidance on things like that, because they've been through it themselves before. But I agree with you, Megan. I think that going back to the core source always can be helpful at times, but I think we have a lot of resources that we forget to tap into. So I just want to remind everybody that other people who have learned more before us often are very happy to share. So
definitely. We have, looks like 2 questions in the Q&A. So one is from Omar. I'm getting ready to take 2 months off for paternity, and we are in the process of paying a part-time person to cover while I'm gone. We don't have any benefits, so just wanted to offer a certain amount per month. I guess thoughts on if that makes sense, if that works.
Well, I mean, I would say, I'm not sure I have quite enough information to say definitively. My guess, based on just this information, is that that would be an independent contractor, but I can't quite tell what the person would be doing, which is part of the kind of test. And so, yes, my understanding was that that person would be a contractor, and it's also time limited, right? And so that would be another way that you could kind of say, all right, it's just for this project or this, period of time that we're trying to set up, a relationship like this. And just post it in there. So I think that unless there's something else I'm missing, that's kind of how I would categorize that one.
Yeah, but I think it definitely goes to the fact that many of the situations are unique, right? Because of the subjective nature of both these tests, it is kind of a case by case, need kind of all of the nuances to figure it out, which I know does not make anything easier for anybody, but that's just kind of part of how it works. We have one more here. We are planning to sublease, and I would be a full-time employee, also owner of the company. Would I still be required to provide proof of workers' compensation? If so, where should I go to establish that?
That is a good question. I'm not sure if I know exactly when you say sublease what that means, so I might need a little more clarification.
Yeah.
My guess is that if you are, well, it would probably depend on when I say sublease, I'm assuming this is the larger organization, what their workers' comp coverage would say about you as a sublet employee. So I think that one would definitely be worth looking into, their workers' compensation coverage and whether or not that would apply to you. Because sometimes there are some kind of differences based on the different policies. And you can add different umbrella pieces or riders on some of the workers' comp policies to cover for some of these things. So that one would be, without looking, I don't know if I could tell you for sure.
Yeah, I think it depends on I've had that happen before, where the people with whom I'm working, they legally required Delve to have workers' comp. So I think it is that I would see, I'm not totally sure I understand the sublease part either, because I haven't done it exactly that way. And then lots of the small business insurers in the, happen to be based in the Maryland area, they do offer workers' comp insurance. So, and it doesn't tend to be super expensive, but if you're required to have it, they make it pretty easy to get it.
Mhm.
So if you do a search, you'd probably find multiple organizations that offer that. I have it, so because it covers us, so it's easy to get. Did you see that Ella has a great point in the chat itself about knowing what questions are legal or illegal to ask? I don't know if you two saw that.
I just saw that.
Yeah.
That is a great point. Yeah. Alan, did you want to weigh in on some of that?
Yeah, so apparently every jurisdiction also has specific things that you can and cannot ask during a job interview, and it would be good to reach out to the board of whatever jurisdiction, wherever you live, to ask, inquire about that. In my personal experience, my husband and I had a restaurant in Washington, D.C. We're hiring cooks and dishwashers, and our manager during the interview asked somebody interviewing for a dishwasher position, asked if they had a criminal background history, which we didn't ask her to ask that. She just took it upon herself. And apparently that's illegal. And we ended up paying a $700 fine for that. And there are people who go from place to place specifically to get kind of gotcha type situation. And then they go and get that. So just important to ask what it is, even though in this case, criminal background on anybody is publicly available record. You can just search, see that, but apparently it's illegal to ask. So something that seems like, would be a good idea to ask somebody that question, especially you hiring for cashier or something like that. But nope.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a really good point. And that's where that structured interview with the associated questions makes it really clear. We're all going to go in the interview. Our objective is this, and criminal background has nothing to do with these 3 or 4 criteria that we're interviewing for. And yeah, it is easy. And even, you can kind of get on the conversation. It seems very natural to ask some of those things. And then we had a client last week who, mentioned that she was involved in litigation with her previous employer. And they were asking, what do we do about that? These really tricky situations when a candidate offers you information versus when you ask. But the employer asking those questions, can be problematic very quickly, as Ella said. And there are lists of these kinds of things that you can find. Again, I think Not that you should get everything just from Googling, but this is one that you can find based on the state or jurisdiction, the types of things you are and are not allowed to ask.
Generally speaking, my rule of thumb always has been, if you can pretty much ask anything you want about their ability to do a job from the point of view of the requirements of the position. And so job focused on their ability to do that is fine. You know, have you done this in the past? What's your experience in doing that? Anything that strays past that is much thinner ice, you know, like they're asking, you know, you can ask somebody if they're available to work the work hours that you have, but you're not allowed to ask them what childcare they might have to be able to do that, for example. So, you know, as long as you stick to, like Megan said, what you know is the core responsibilities of the job and the ability to perform the duties, you're pretty firm. But people forget, and where we often see that happen is some people trying to make conversation with people, just casual conversation can lead itself down actually kind of a bit of a path where people then might say that you're asking them about their personal lives too much. So just also be aware that when you're in like Ala said, when you're in an interviewing process, it is a formal situation and a formal process that you need to follow.
Agreed.
Looks like those are the questions we have, so we can go to this
Yeah.
last slide.
Yeah. So we talked a lot about some of the technical stuff here at the end related to categorization, just because that's one that I think is just, you know, top of mind and also ends up being difficult to kind of navigate sometimes if you haven't done it before. But really, like if you kind of look at this and think about making sure that you've had a really well-defined problem that will be solved by making this hire. And if you can't kind of make that really clear, and not just because someone tells you, it should be a problem that you believe is for the future of your business, something that needs to be solved right now versus in the future. Obviously, we talked a lot about the clear hiring plan and making sure that those specific interview questions are tailored towards those items that you kind of put on your rubric or scorecard or whatever you choose to call it. And then being really consistent. If you didn't ask one candidate about something, don't ask the next one. Try to be very, very, very consistent. And that helps eliminate some of the bias. You can't entirely do that, but as much as possible, it helps kind of making sure that you're evaluating everyone consistently. We talked about the skills assessments and, you know, just setting expectations. Expect to spend a lot of your time recruiting and hiring. So get comfortable with it because you're going to be doing it a lot. And, you know, get mentors who have hired really well and talk to them about what they found useful. And then start sourcing, even if you're not quite sure, you know, exactly what you're looking for, just starting to do some outreach. Then once you start to realize what your needs are, you can kind of go back and see, all right, is this kind of person that I would need, or is this somebody more as an advisor? And then, you know, don't skip your onboarding. Make sure you've got kind of a plan for those first couple of weeks and months. And then using those performance expectations sometimes from your scorecard can be helpful when you build your onboarding plan. So if you need them to have good communication skills, you can put that in the onboarding plan and create, you know, things around that would help reinforce both what you've asked them to assess, but also then what your expectations are for them moving forward. So yeah, any other questions or any just kind of comments on your own, you know, hiring experiences or war stories?
And I can also unmute your mic at this point, just if you raise your hand, we can do that. Well, no questions so far. But while we still have a few minutes left, I wanted to let everyone know that Megan and Blair will be, and I'm not sure if Chandler is coming, but there will be a follow-on session at the end of March, I believe March 26th, where they will tackle more advanced HR topics for companies who already have employees. So if you are interested, that session is going to be in person at MTech on March 26th. You will receive an email with a registration link. Well, thank you so much. This has been really, really interesting and really important topic that everybody's focused on their innovation, on their invention, on their market and customers, but hiring is so important. Hiring the right person for the right job is so important and sometimes gets overlooked, especially early on. So thank you so much and look forward to your session on March 26th.
Excellent. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.